How are we all this afternoon?
Good, thank you.
Excellent.
We'll give another 30 seconds to a minute to let people join, and then we'll get going.
Grand. Jack, do you want to do a bit of housekeeping before we commence, including the older recorded?
Brilliant. So those of you here already, general procedure is that if you can make sure your microphone is muted, please. That keeps everything streaming much nicer and keeps everything nice and crisp and clear. If you'd like to have your video off, that's up to you. It's always nice to see a friendly face as well, but that is entirely your choice. Okay. Excellent. Matthew, should we start?
Yeah, before we do, it's up to you, Jack, about how we deal with questions. It's there's not too many people here at the moment, so we could do it as a bit more of a round table rather than a presentation, but up to you really.
Okay.
As
well,
few people want to join according to Laura as well, so we'll get a few people come in now.
Excellent.
Do you want to hold off a couple of minutes?
Yeah, let's hold off. Let's hold off for another minute. It sounds like people are in the lobby, so we'll just hold off and then we'll get started properly. Apologies to all the people that were on time in that respect. Thank you very much. If you just bear with us.
It's usually me that's rushing from one thing into another. So.
Okay, let's make a start and people can come in as they go. Right then, so good evening to everyone that's joined us. Thank you very, very much for coming along tonight and donating some of your time. The purposes of tonight's workshop is to provide some more information about the Jewellery Quarter Neighbourhood Plan. Tonight is part of a series of workshops which are looking to take a bit of a deeper dive into some specific key elements about the Neighbourhood Plan. And tonight we are looking at agenda of the heritage agenda, designated heritage assets and the special buildings within the quarter, but also the design of new development and how that design might affect both the area's character and the individual buildings therein. There's a number of these workshops that are going to be run. This is one of 3 detailed workshops that are scheduled at the moment. The other 2 will focus in the first instance on the jewellery and creative industries and how the plan aims to support those, of course, as important to the quarter's heritage as its built environment, those very industries that make it the vibrant place that we love. That will be being held on Wednesday, the 16th of September at 1 p.m. And then the third workshop will be talking about the planning process more broadly and how the plan will affect it and how the plan will work within that process. And that's being undertaken at Tuesday, 22nd of September at 5 p.m. Both of those events can be registered for at the moment. They'll go up on Eventbrite. If you'd like to find the link, go to the JQ Plan Twitter feed or the website and they'll be there and ready to sign up. So do tune in. There's going to be some local people who help put the plan together talking about that. But tonight is about heritage and design. It's a key part of the Jewellery Quarter Neighbourhood Plan. So it's one we want to have given a lot of attention and want to give a lot more attention to in our consultation process. So we're going to have a pretty simple structure. We're going to have an introduction to the plan more broadly, very quickly, just to give you some context about where it's come from, what the objectives are and how you can be involved. Then we're going to go into a short presentation mode, if you like, not too long, not too detailed, going over the heritage assets approach and the design approach and giving some context there. And then most importantly, there's going to be some opportunities for some Q&A. On that issue of the questions and answer, there's a chat option in Zoom, so please do make use of it. So if you have any questions as they come up, if they pop into your head or it's something you've been wanting to ask, put them in that chat feature. We've got someone collating all those questions, and we'll either pick them up as we go along if the right time seems to crop up, or we'll collate them and we'll address them at the end. And if anyone wants to make some comments at the end, there's going to be opportunity to do so as well. So we'll start off with a quick introduction to two of us, the two of us as part of the neighbourhood planning process that are really leading on tonight. So I'll pass over to Matthew first. Matthew, do you want to tell everyone who you are and about your engagement with the plan?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jack. My name's Matthew Bott. I'm a local resident, and I'm co-chair of the Jewellery Quarter Neighbourhood Plan. My day job, I am head of design management for a large national contractor. So my interest, if you like, is in the built environment, and particularly kind of out of hours interest or pastime is the historic built environment, particularly the Jewellery Quarter. Through my involvement in the neighbourhood plan, I became director of the Jewellery Quarter Development Trust, which is the overall sponsor or initiator of the neighbourhood plan.
Thank you, Matthew. My name's Jack Hanson. Professionally, I'm a heritage consultant, heritage and planning principally, based in an urban design company in Birmingham. I'm also a trustee for Birmingham Conservation Trust, and that was originally my way into the plan, if you like. We're based in the Jewellery Quarter at the Coffin Works, and it was something we were very much supportive of and wanted to be interested in. I'm a relative latecomer to the neighbourhood planning process. I was principally involved in the design guide, which we'll talk about a little bit later, joining a group of people that have been working very hard on it. So that's me. And then Matt, if I probably pass back to you now to give a quick introduction about the plan and what we're doing.
Sure. So thanks, Jack. I guess I won't go into too much detail about the history of neighbourhood planning. Suffice to say, it came into Act in 2011 as part of the Localism Act, and it became a thing where communities can take on writing planning legislation that affects their area, and it's largely been taken up by rural communities, but there is a bit of a groundswell of urban communities doing the same. And one of the pioneers for this actually was Balsall Heath, which has had a neighbourhood plan in place for quite a few years now. One of the things that most affects us in the Jewellery Quarter is that we are what's known as a business plan. So it's because of the variety of people that are here, both working and living, the business community has to have as much a say in the plan as the residential community. Historically, there's over 1,000 neighbourhood plans have been made, and I think we're in double figures in terms of the number of those that are business plans. So we're in a very small number overall. So if you want to, find out more about neighbourhood planning and localism, you can go to the MHCLG website, government website, or just Google neighbourhood planning, and locality have some very good guidance. So I won't go into the whys and wherefores of the legislation that enables this, but I will talk a little bit about the history of the Jewellery Quarter neighbourhood plan, which actually started 7 years ago, with the community really kind of saying something must be done. The community, through the Jewellery Quarter Development Trust, which is made up of the Neighbourhood Forum, which was the residents' body, the Jewellery Quarter Association, and a couple of other organisations, really said there's a lot that needs to happen in the Jewellery Quarter, and a lot that needs to change, and a lot that needs to be rescued or conserved. What are the tools available to us to do this, and the neighbourhood plan is one of those tools. So that started about 7 years ago, and we spent certainly a good couple of years gathering the evidence base, which really gave us direction as to what the neighbourhood plan should be tackling. These things are time limited, so we applied for redesignation last year, and at the tail end of last year, the area neighbourhood planning area was redesignated. Now, one thing it's probably worth me highlighting on the map on the screen for those that haven't got their bearings and can see my pointer. In this southeast corner is Great Charles Street, Queensway, and then if you follow it round clockwise, it goes past the old BMW garage up to the roundabout where Big Tesco is, follows the ring road round, and then you'll see we go across Great Hampton Street. And what we do is take in the industrial area that borders Newtown, so that there's a clear distinction between what is a business area and what is a very domestic scale of architecture and very residential area. So we take all of that in and brush up against the gun quarter and then back round. And this is larger than the conservation area. It's larger than the bid area, but the conservation area is likely to expand eastwards into some of the neighbourhood plan area, and I'll come on to that. So why do it? Really, it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was about the community looking around for the tools that can empower itself. And as a community, we know better than many in terms of what the pressures are, what the challenges are, and what the assets of the area are. And it was felt that the current planning, supplementary planning guidance and document were getting on a bit. They'd done their job insofar as saving the Jewellery Quarter from overdevelopment, but now it was shifting from a reactive role to a much more proactive one about promoting development, because neighbourhood plans have to be pro-development, promoting development to best serve the needs of the Jewellery Quarter. And that was the underlying cause. There's some goals which were articulated, which should come up on the screen now. Bear with me. There we go. I guess some of the issues that were identified, which we'll all be familiar with, are the fact that there's still a large amount of dereliction in the Jewellery Quarter. A lot of new development really doesn't come up to standard, particularly when it sits alongside the heritage buildings, which then detracts from those heritage buildings. But also what we mustn't forget is the heritage of the Jewellery Quarter is jewellery and designing and making and trading and enterprise. And it's not just about preserving the historic buildings in Aspic, it's about promoting and investing in those industries to last us for another 250 years. So you can read for yourself there the vision of the neighbourhood plan, and that's available on all the documentation and on the website. And really I've just highlighted the bit there that talks about a creative approach to conservation. So it's trying to change the emphasis away from conserving things as in preserving things as they are, but conserving, being more creative with that approach, so that we're conserving and allowing things to evolve. Underpinning the everything that's in the neighbourhood plan are the 4 goals about businesses and residents coexisting but being successful and successful together. The driving up the quality of new developments, both design and workmanship, and tackling dereliction. Really underlining the 3rd one is the heritage of our buildings, but also the heritage of our jewellery and creative industries. And then the 4th one is a look to the future about what do we need to do in the Jewellery Quarter to help it grow and ensure its future vitality. And really underlining the whole thing is that Jack and I do this in our spare time. It's very much a community-led, volunteer-led activity. We do get in professional support where we need it, but it's very much a grassroots movement. So I think it's really important for when we're engaging with people. We are the people that are usually sat there being engaged with. So it's very much a two-way street, and we really want your feedback on this. And I'll talk a little bit later about how we go about doing that. But it's a draft, and it needs your input, it needs your support, and hopefully you'll like what you hear next. I'll just move on. Finally, in terms of navigating around the document, you've got 2 documents available for download that are the neighbourhood plan. One of them is the very detailed, very planning language, quite difficult to read, a bit kind of, why is that comma there and what's it trying to tell us? So that's a necessity because it's got to be used as a planning document. My personal favourite is the plain English version, which is a lot easier to read, but both are structured in the same way. So we mentioned the 4 goals earlier. The neighbourhood plan has 4 distinct sections. They're not tied into the goals. They're very much cross-cutting issues, and you can see them there. So the first one is really putting the jewellery and creative industries up first and foremost. Then the second one is talking about the jewellery quarter as a wider, more creative mixed-use area. Third one is simply about getting to and getting around the jewellery quarter. And then the fourth one is about what we experience when we're here in the jewellery quarter, and what we touch, what we look at. So you know, I won't go into all of those in detail now. That's just a bit of an overview of how to navigate around the neighbourhood plan as a document. So Jack, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matthew. And just as said, if there's any questions about those broader elements of the plan, do just pop them in the chat section, and we can address them as we go along or at the end. So as alluded to, there's something of a 3-pronged strategy for heritage within the plan. At first, it's about creating our future heritage, which is effectively about the design of new places within the quarter and making sure those areas are of the highest quality. It's nurturing our economic heritage, which is taking a very strong view that the traditional industries and the modern creative industries within the quarter are as important to the character of the place as the built environment. Effectively, we don't want to lose all that and have the buildings remaining, then we just become a museum piece. You know, it's as much about the vibrancy of the place as it is those bricks and mortar. And then finally, it is about safeguarding that built heritage. It's about making sure that our listed buildings, our non-designated heritage assets, and the broader appearance of the place and the aesthetic and the quality of its townscape is respected in the way it should be, is given the special regard it deserves in planning decisions and in design process and the management of those bits too. So I'm going to start at number 1 before handing over to Matt for number 2. So we're going to have a little quick introduction about creating our future heritage, or that new buildings in the quarter are going to be expected to be at least as good as the old ones, the ones that create the special place. Design in the quarter, the design of new development, is a particular hot topic, and quite rightly so. I think most of us that know the place, whether that's as a resident or whether that's someone who's worked here or worked within the management of the area, knows that actually there's been some really poor quality development come forward that have really brought down the area, that people don't value, that don't really respond and have the standard that we would expect for an area of historic standard and for high quality design. Everyone has a tale, everyone has a particular poor development that they really don't like. And it's an area by which there is a lot of good work out there, there's a lot of good documents in existence, and there's actually a lot of good intention too. You know, there's a lot of people with their eyes on the quarter, within local authority, within the local area, and within professional circles that want to see it do the best it can. But maybe less so in recent years, but definitely over the last 15 years, I think it's fair to say that the quality of the loss of development has been below what we want. And in doing so, there's been a steady decline there in what we want to see. Why does that happen? You know, what's the status quo, if you like? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, which I'll touch on in a bit. But we do have good information bases. We do have a conservation area appraisal and management plan that outlines the character and appearance of the area, what makes it special, what we might want to do relating to that historic character to manage it. And there is also design guidance there, you know, things that are supposed to steer development to a good direction. So we've got good things, but why are we not quite there? Why is it not quite worked? And there's a couple of reasons for that, which the neighbourhood plan looks to directly address. So effectively to put us in a new position whereby the issues that we've found that are leading to poor quality outcomes have been got rid of, or at least mitigated. And even better, we move into a positive position. So things that we've put in place can promote and incentivize positive design, not just prevent the stuff that we don't want to see. That's a really important balance to find. The first issue we've had within the quarter, by looking at development over the last 15 years, has been to do with something that is a problem nationally, is that the design in new development is not something that's unfortunately given a really great degree of weight within the planning process and planning decisions. It's perpetually held up as something that is important. You know, inherently design of development will lead to good or bad outcomes, but actual design policy is quite poorly weighted. You contrast that to, say, heritage, which is given very great weight within the planning balance. You know, in the very simplest terms, it is just weighing one thing against another and making sure we're more net positive than net negative. But while we can preserve heritage assets very well, what goes next to them can be a little bit more problematic. And that applies particularly so within a conservation area. Now, of course, the conservation area talks about conservation. It's about keeping what we have that is special in the simple terms. And our policy and our legislation for conservation areas as existing talk about the need to preserve and enhance conservation areas. Now, great, you would say that's really, really good. Surely all development will preserve what makes it special. Well, unfortunately, preservation in conservation terms has been established through various bits of case law, means to do no harm, you know, to not make anything worse, effectively. And that sets a bit of a low bar, frankly. It means that if it's passable, if it's not harming an area, then it doesn't necessarily warrant refusal. In the quarter, where we have, say, gap sites, if you have an empty site and you come along with a building which isn't great, it's a 5, 6 out of 10, but it's not awful, it doesn't detract from an area because it's a blank site, you're talking from the status quo. If the blank site has a negative contribution to the area and the building makes at least a slightly better contribution or even an equally negative contribution, it's technically preservation. And therefore, planners find it very hard to refuse bad design when that happens. In a similar vein, if you have a very poor quality building and someone wants to knock it down and build something else, their obligation within a conservation area is only to do something that's a little bit better. And if they do even a little bit better from rubbish, they've fulfilled that duty. And that's the challenge we've had, if you like, that actually the standard within the quarter hasn't been high, the baseline requirement hasn't been high. And if you flood an area with mediocre development that technically ticks the boxes we need it to, and you flood an area of very high architectural quality with mediocre quality, bit by bit we dilute what makes that place special. And that's what we've been trying to address. So we've been trying to put more weight onto design and decision making through the neighbourhood plan. And that comes through the neighbourhood plan policies. They're very clear that a higher standard is expected. We expect architects to do their best quality approaches, that we expect their best quality work to be done today in the same way that we did historically. It builds upon the national planning policy framework, it builds upon the local plan, and it aims to give a bit of a bigger stick, if you like, in terms of expecting design quality within the area. The second approach is to slightly rejig those evidence base and those documents that we already had to have a slightly different emphasis, to work in two ways, not just preventing what's bad, but also promoting what's good. And again, that's given weight through the neighbourhood plan policies. The conservation area appraisal and management plan is being refreshed by the City Council, quite a large investment for them to do that, but that's been re-looked at. It's been looking at the Jewellery Quarter as it is now, and it's looking to make a document that's going to work with the neighbourhood plan, but also work with the new design documents as they come forward. There's also been a full refresh refresh of the design guidance for the Jewellery Quarter, which is a core part of the neighbourhood plan, as a document called Design in the Jewellery Quarter. Now, within the quarter, we now have will potentially have a new dedicated document promoting high quality design. And that's been undertaken by local practitioners, local experts in design. Matthew led that for a good number of years. Larry Priest, director at Bryant Priest Newman, David Marnie, PCPT, Dan Atchinson at Fera, for example. Local architects, some of our best architects and best practitioners have been involved in this and pushing it forward, writing its content, looking at what we're talking about. And that's looking at a whole range of issues. That's looking at issues of scale, it's looking at layout, it's looking at permeability of spaces, it's looking at the public realm and the private realm, but it's also looking at finer details like, materials and the like. Sections on public artwork as well, those areas that are going to enhance that place. Now, they were already there in previous documents, but the difference is now is that, one, it sets a bit more forward-looking approach. It's about securing quality through new development. It's about looking at how that interrelates. It is about the contemporary as much as it's the traditional and the way it engages with existing buildings. It is about new development and new sites. But it also focuses much more on the design process and the planning process that operate within this country and how those decisions are made. So it tries to key into those key areas, whether that's the pre-application stage, whether that's the design phase or the planning application stage. It's targeted much more at the key stakeholders. So the architect, the planner, the developer, the local individual wanting to make a comment, the decision maker, the councillor, and so on and so on. It's no longer just heritage specific, it's as much about modern development too, and it's about creating that new framework. So the combination between the two there is hopefully the way we rectify some of those loopholes and those issues we were having before, which were still leading to poor quality development. We've put more weight on design through neighbourhood plan policy, and we've updated the core design documents to work more effectively within the modern planning process and to respond to the new neighbourhood planning process that comes forward too. And the key is, overall, Matt, if we go to the next slide, is to just avoid things like this. Just some examples, we've all seen them. Apologies if these are any that people live in or occupy, but none of these, unless some of these are poor, but several of these are actually kind of okay, but they're not great. And we don't want okay, we want brilliant, we want really good, we want high quality, we want things to match the standard of the past and to really push things forward. So that's our broad approach to modern design in the quarter. I said on the neighbourhood plan website, alongside the plain English and the full neighbourhood planning guide, that document is available in consultation format, which is mostly written text at the moment. And that's there for comment as much as the plan itself. So if these are areas that you're interested in, we do encourage you to go and have a look and have a read through, submit comments, maybe even specifically relating to the design guide. Maybe something's been missed or something should be raised, and think about that process, how you might use it. So that's design. We've had a question in from Adam. What's your best example of recent new development, any, that has been built something sympathetic to the area from a design point of view? There's a second question, but Matthew, do you want to, have you got any thoughts on that first about your favourite example recently in the quarter?
Well, this is where design comes into its own as a very subjective thing rather than objective. Because I think first of all, my view is that good design in the Jewellery Quarter is all about context. So as long as there's a conscious decision about what's happening, then you can end up with good design that not necessarily everyone will like, but some people will love, some people won't like, but I think everybody can find common ground on that. Notwithstanding it is good design. It's a bit of it appears on all sorts of publications, but the one that jumps out to my mind is Block Hotel, and the reason for that is that it's got that traditional scale. It's got the diminishing windows as it goes up, so it's very kind of Georgian in its inspiration, but it is unmistakably a modern contemporary hotel using modern materials. They've chosen brick, but it's black brick and it's got black mortar, so there's lots of kind of modern twists on the traditional traditional approach. I think another one that has just opened is the new UCB building, which does a very similar kind of thing. And speaking from a construction point of view, it uses modern methods of construction because a lot of that was made off-site and then brought in on the back of a lorry and put together. But I think both of those buildings, if you lifted them out of the Jewellery Quarter and plonked them anywhere else in Birmingham, they wouldn't work. They are unmistakably Jewellery Quarter buildings. How about yours, Jack?
It's an interesting one. Just to pick up what Matt said before I answer that question, is that what I didn't say is that there is an acknowledgement that there's a subjectivity here. So it's very much been written as at least the modern, the updated design guidance to allow a degree of flexibility. What we don't want to do is constrain designers to design. So there's some degree of prescriptiveness in key areas such as scale. That's a really key area. But in other areas, there's a very clear expression that actually creativity and difference might be welcomed. The key is it's about justifying that process and allowing architects to justify a design that might be a bit different, that works, or concurrently, a local who knows that development doesn't work very well to justify and use the document and the framework it provides to maybe submit an objection or support a development. So it is about that flexibility too. My personal one that comes to mind, it hasn't been built at the moment, but the consented development on the corner of St. Paul's Square by Space Studio, just a little corner unit. It's quite a modest little thing, but it engages with the corner very well. Its proportions are very good, as are its materiality. It's a very overtly modern building, though. One of our most historic spaces, and it introduces a nice splash of colour as proposed at ground level. It's that kind of tiled, coloured approach at that ground floor, which I think is excellent. I love colour in historic areas. I think we can very easily go to the very traditional palette, but I think it's a really, really good approach, and I think it's a really good scheme. It's modest, but it's also ambitious, and I think there's a lot of that in the quarter, which is very, very good. But a very good question, Adam. Thank you very much. Should we? So we've got a few more coming in. Height is not a friend to the JQ, Heritage Court, the Big Peg. How can we? Sorry, I'll have to pick up my chat there. As I said,
it's a big one.
How can we ensure that the height of new building are kept in check? I am going to have to, Neil, flick through this because I said just keep thinking even when the story has pegged, floors must be incorporated into the plan. Okay, so Neil, what I'll do is I'll just talk about height very quickly. I should ask those wondering, I said I'm jumping around. People are probably wondering why I'm in my car, which is a little bit strange. I appreciate. Not anticipated. I'm picking up my cat from the vet behind me in 30 minutes. So it was a bit not expected, unfortunately, but we'll see, but we muddle on. So great question about scale, really, really important element. There's a very strong commitment within the design guidance and the plan about the Jewellery Quarter's prevailing 2 to 4 story scale. That has always been there, actually. And again, going back to that question, it was like, well, there's a commitment to 2 to 4 stories, but why isn't it being enacted? Why are things going up? And there's been a few reasons for that, in terms of where the weighting wasn't quite there, where the justification to refuse things wasn't quite there. But yes, we actually completely agree. It should be predominantly 2 to 4 stories. Some things that have been put in that are a bit different is that we're very much trying to avoid monoliths now. So there's new policy pushing back against where it's just all 4 story. It needs to actually go up and down a little bit. We need 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3 along a street scene. And secondly, that the tallest element within the surroundings can't be the baseline. If something's 4 stories, doesn't mean that's the justification for everything to be 4 stories. The 4 is generally the exception rather than the rule. The rule is 3. Having said that, what we will say is that we're not locking down anything above 4 stories because there might be something exceptional that comes forward that has an element of 5. And that's the way the planning process works. It's a kind of comply or justify approach. So compliance to everything is 2 to 4. But if something comes along that is truly exceptional and they can justify that, then there might be a vehicle to have that. But the threshold to get that is much, much, much higher. And the benefit in other areas to achieve that has to be extreme, whether that's design or whether that's some form of other public benefit. But there's a whole section on scale, actually, so within the design guide. So I recommend going and having a look and see what your gut says. Does it go far enough, do you think? And if the answer is no, tell us. We'll see what we can do. I didn't quite pick up the other elements of that, Neil, but let me just have a look. Even when the story's been created for...
that one up if you like, Jack.
Yeah.
I'll pick it up with a little teaser, which is really about either tuning in tomorrow about with the kind of creative industries focus, but also just the headline is that the neighbourhood plan talks about the size of and configuration of units. So basically, your McDonald's, Starbucks, and Costa Coffees, they work on spreadsheets and they require high footfall and a certain square footage of unit. So if you don't have those kind of proportions, then they're less interested. Now that's not to say that they, as the world evolves, that might take a closer look at other areas. But I think one of the outstanding successes of the Jewellery Quarter is to keep its very independent ethos, and a lot of that is down to what some would regard as quite awkward shapes and sizes of units, and also just rents. So people can afford to set up a business. The thing that I'll just add on to the height bit as well is that the neighbourhood plan sits hand in glove with the conservation area management plan. So that the conservation area management plan we expect will reinforce that 4-storey max. The neighbourhood plan talks about context. But then it also opens the door a little bit to the neighbourhood plan area that sits outside of the conservation area, where six stories could well be appropriate. But the underlying point is that you've got to have a damn good reason to go over 4 stories, and you might well have a damn good reason if you're giving so much back to the Jewellery Quarter.
Excellent. It's a little bit conscious of time, so I think we should probably push on to get us within 6, before 6. So the next is nurturing our economic heritage, which is over to Matthew.
Yeah. So this one, as you might recall, is really talking about the heritage of making in the Jewellery Quarter. 250 years old. A lot of it predates most of our buildings, and really the sub headline is that if the old building's in the quarter of the body, then this is the soul of the quarter. So what we've done here, it all hinges around in that. If you recall back to the first section of the plan, it all hinges around this creative, the creative and jewellery industry, and we've designated this creative district in the heart of the Jewellery Quarter. It's a bit of a departure for those who are familiar with the conservation area and the way that the conservation area is made up. It's a bit of a departure from that, because the conservation area primarily is concerned about the historic character of the Jewellery Quarter. So it's split down into sub areas which are all kind of like each other, as in the buildings and the way that the area developed are all of a particular era or a particular scale, architectural style, largely driven by the uses when that area was developed. Now, slightly unfortunately, the jewellery industry doesn't really care about those historic areas in terms of when they're deciding where to move to. So what we've done here is we undertook a major survey and identified over 250 jewellery related businesses. We mapped them and effectively drew a line around them and said, this area is our creative district, and everything that happens within this area must contribute to the future of those creative industries. Now, you might question, well, why am I saying jewellery and creative industries? Under government standard industrial classification, I think it's called, the design and manufacture of jewellery is a creative industry. And of course, if you go beyond the jewellery industry as you see it, you can see that we've got music studios, we've got architecture, we've got so much stuff that all falls within that creative industry classification. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned before, the availability of space. Creative industries all tend to like the same kind of space. and for a lot of them, it's the proximity to the city core as well. So really by providing or making sure that new development provides for the future of all of these creative industries, what we do is we don't shoehorn a strict definition of the jewellery industry in. We allow it the flexibility to evolve, because 3D printing, bespoke design, all of that is the future of the jewellery industry. So as you can see on the map on the left, the existing businesses are marked in purple, and then there's a hatched area which really links all of those together. And any development that takes place inside that area has to support those industries. One of the biggest ways and one of the biggest challenges that the industry set us, if you like, and said you need to tackle is rent and land value, because if people are buying up property for residential development, that raises the expectation, or what Stuart Holt called the hope value, of the land. What we're seeking to do here by inside this creative district, but also as a wider area, is just increase the supply, because the best way of tackling rent is not by tackling value rather, is not by putting rent controls in place, but it's by making sure that there's a plentiful supply, so that if there's 100 units available this year, there'll be 120 next year. Because if you have 100 units available this year and all the prices go up, then you've still only got 100 units. And that's underpinning it, and that allows the flexibility for businesses to move around, to grow, to shrink, or do whatever they need to do, because you can't use a planning process to dictate future industrial strategy. The other bit that the industry told us that they needed was skills and business development. Now, planning cannot deal with that at all in terms of tackling those issues. But what planning can do, and what the neighbourhood plan is doing, is paving the way for a Jewellery Quarter creative incubator. So it's really throwing the gauntlet down to say the planning process will not be a hindrance for establishing a creative incubator. And that incubator might be a single building, it might be a series of spaces around the Jewellery Quarter. But if you come and set one up, the planning process is enabling that to happen. So in terms of, I talked about what the industry has said to us, and this is the evidence that has told us that we need to do something. In the top left, the draft conservation area management plan is really underlining that the value, the land value and the rental values of residential development at this moment in time is a potential threat to jewellery making and other industries. The industry cluster survey 4 years ago showed that 2/3 of businesses saw the focus on residential development being a threat to the viability of Jewellery Quarter industries. Going back even further in time, 2013, unrestricted residential growth could have a detrimental effect on business, both in terms of noise, but also value. And yet, conversely, in the bottom left for the townscape heritage work that's underway, people come to the Jewellery Quarter, and when they come to the Jewellery Quarter, most people are most impressed with the rich industrial history, which includes the living industry, not just stuff that's happened in the past. I'll just have a quick look to see if there are any questions.
There's a question from Neil, which I'll probably pick up on in the next section, Matthew, about those elements. I think if anyone's got any other questions for something Matthew just talked about.
There's time for questions at the end as well.
Brilliant. Well, let's press along with the next section then. I said we can do that. So finally is about safeguarding our built heritage, and this is the looking specifically at the traditional buildings. So Neil, this is where your question will be answered, if you like. So those we're talking about here is well, you all know, designated heritage assets, listed buildings, non-designated heritage assets, which are those buildings of architectural or historic interest that are not designated as listed buildings. The conservation area itself, of course, is a designated heritage asset. The area has a very, very good representation from designation point of view in terms of the powers we have to protect and enhance the heritage assets that we have. And actually, through existing legislation and existing policy, there really is very robust and strong frameworks in place for engaging with heritage assets. But as we've alluded to, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything always goes right. And there are still problems and significant problems within the quarter that need addressing for us to have confidence that our valued heritage assets are going to have a bright future, whether that be in their existing use or a different use, and as part of a development or standing in their own right. So the plan recognises those existing frameworks, but really looks at how they're operating specifically within the quarter and has tried to reinforce where powers are working very well. We've tried to fill some gaps and, shall we say, close some loopholes where things are not going so well, but particularly stamping down on bad practice, but like the design guide we were talking about before, incentivising good practice as well. So carrot and stick is kind of throughout the entirety of the plan. Incentivize what needs work, and the stick to beat people when they're not doing things that they should be doing, but that's legally or even morally, you might say. So there's a couple of elements within it that we're looking at. First is incentivizing new use for derelict buildings. As I said, dereliction is a particularly big problem in the area, whether that be because buildings have gone out of use or, as is mentioned, because buildings are being kind of sat on or in, if you like, without being brought forward. So there are very clear incentives within the neighbourhood plan for bringing buildings, particularly traditional buildings, back into use. Now, how does that work? Well, actually, the incentive is to give greater flexibility relative to other policies within the plan. And that operates in different areas differently. So within the economic character zone, the creative quarter, as Matthew was talking about, it's less flexible, but outside of it, it's more flexible. But within both areas, there's still a greater degree of flexibility if you have a listed building, or if you have, and then particularly so, if you have a heritage at risk building that's on either the national at risk register or within the local Birmingham City Council at risk register. What that means is that perhaps there's a little bit more, allowance for a change of use, but we still want to keep those uses in certain areas in certain ways. There might be more flexibility for a certain intervention that wouldn't have been allowed elsewhere. And we're doing two things. One, we don't want to tie the hands of those that are willing to bring a heritage asset back into life and actually accidentally find that we've made it harder for them to get planning permission. We don't want to do that at all. But concurrently, maybe we want to divert a bit of the investment for people that do want to do a certain thing in the area towards one of these buildings. So perhaps they would have chosen the not very interesting, not very at-risk building next door because the planning permission would have been easy. But actually now the permission is much harder, but it's easier next door. We give the carrot to move next door and take that building on and take on the project, for example. So maybe you do want to do something a bit different. And the only way you want to do that, you can do that, is by taking on one of these projects and investing in the area accordingly. Trying to guarantee that public benefit for the people in the quarter by bringing that heritage asset back to life. Really importantly, that does not apply to buildings where there is evidence of neglect. So if a developer is known to have sat on the building, or that building has sat in neglect for a long period of time, that does not, and within the plan very explicitly says, does not open up that flexibility. So it closes the door to people sitting on it and saying, no, if you have a derelict building and it's simply sat derelict for a long time and you've ignored the opportunities that have come forward, that you haven't kept it in good maintenance, if you haven't kept it in good repair, if there's need for enforcement against you, actually the scales tip. It becomes even harder for you to have that flexibility that would be presented. So it provides an incentive for people to actually bring things up and keep them maintained. What it also does, it puts a very robust expression of support to the City Council for enforcement measures. It says very clearly that that's what we expect to happen, that it will happen, and the local authorities' powers to enforce, which are very strong in respect of listed buildings, are more able to be applied. It gives them a framework to come along and do that work and operate in that way. Plans are afoot to support that in various areas, not just through the neighbourhood plan, but enabled by the plan, as the plan justifying for more resources, for example, to come in and do that. So watch the space in that area. That's all being operated on. So again, it's a case of saying with heritage that actually, yes, there is deep frustration that these buildings are just being sat there derelict, but the powers are actually in place to prevent that. Is just making them more applicable within the quarter, making it easier to apply them, and closing some of the loopholes which certain property owners are using to avoid those processes as well. It's not just about the big elements too. It's not just about the big change of use or the big intervention. It's also about things such as looking at meanwhile uses, which is about using temporary uses in these buildings, giving a bit more flexibility for people, whether that's artists or whether that's pop-up shops or things like that, or community groups, to be able to move in and bring a bit of life to these buildings on a more regular basis, maybe with a higher turnover, but understanding that some of these do take a long time, to come back into use. So we want to use them for different ways. The plan provides justification for that if people want to try and do that. It's looking at other elements as well, such as non-designated heritage assets that are outside of the conservation area. In other words, buildings that we think make a positive contribution to the area because of their architectural or historic interest, but are not within the conservation area and are not listed. So at the moment, they don't have any really formal weight within the planning process for that heritage interest. So they're being identified through the plan as of value, and that inherently gives them weight. So it gives weight principally against demolition, but there's also other elements we can think of therein. And there's broader things as well. There's things like advertisement and signage, and understanding that those elements of the quarter's built environment can affect a listed building too. We don't want a listed building plastered with a load of advertisement that isn't appropriate. You want to make that and maintain that degree of standard throughout. So it really is, it's about reinforcing and giving more support about what we've already got, supporting enforcement where buildings have been allowed to be developed, and reducing flexibility where there is neglect, and increasing flexibility where there's goodwill and clear good intent to do something good with building. Carrot and stick. There's creating new routes, which I think Matthew will touch on just at the end here, and other elements that do link to heritage, but this is the specific areas for built environment. Again, there's a dedicated section, so do go and have a read of the plan if you'd like to see the finer detail. So that's built heritage. Pop any questions in the chat if you've got any specific ones, and we'll pick them up. But just a final slide here, just to give you an example. A few there. So bottom right is now a non-designated heritage asset according to the plan. Might raise some eyebrows there, but we rather like it. It's a very good example of mid-century factories within the quarter, and mid-century retail units at those levels. So I don't think it's a retail unit, Matthew. This is one of yours. But a really key element of the built environment over Great Hampton. And a really key element of potential development interest, large footprints, great potential for demolition and loss. The Hampton pub, another one, no heritage protection is existing, and a bit of estate, needs a little bit of TLC, but actually clearly some interest there. It's communal value and it's historic interest. And opportunities therein. What we want to avoid is, top middle right there, which is the collapse of a building. It went so far that it was effectively lost. And that's really is the last place we want to be. We want to be having our council officers with the authority and the position to go in and see that off at an early stage. And the plan is providing reinforcement to them, but also providing new frameworks with which they can do their job. It is about giving the right tools to the right people to do the job, because the powers are already there. And that's really what the plan tries to do. So that's built heritage. Matthew, shall I pass over to you for the other highlights of the plan?
Great, thanks, Jack. So there's only about 5 minutes left, but really this was a pointer to other parts of the plan, which whilst not directly mentioning heritage, will have a positive impact on heritage, both future heritage and conserving the built heritage, as well as the economic stuff. So really I'll draw your attention to the two maps. I'll start off with the larger one, which is referred to in the plan as nodes, or as a string of pearls, and these are creating dwell spaces which have higher architectural value around them, active uses around them, and high quality public realm, and these will create a sense of place. Some of them already exist, so you have Deus Square, St Paul's Square and Golden Square are already there. but others are places with interventions where we can do something new and create a special place within the jewellery quarter. Then over to the map on the left, which we mentioned on the last slide, are these dotted lines represent new routes through the jewellery quarter and breaching the barrier between the jewellery quarter and Colmore in this example. And really this is about unlocking parts of the jewellery quarter which are quite difficult to access, and unsurprisingly have a large amount of dereliction in them, particularly in this western corner and this northern corner here. So by getting footfall through, you make buildings more attractive to invest in because there's business walking by. And then really just a round off with the, there's a policy in section 4 about art in the jewellery quarter, and really nothing says that you're in a creative district than seeing lots of artwork in the area that you're in. So that's an underlining point, and allows the area to express itself in its built environment in a very visual way. So rounding off really the final steps of the neighbourhood plan. So we're in this Regulation 14 consultation, which is the first of 2 consultations. This is the draft, if you like. This is the bit where we need your feedback. Even if that feedback is, you know what, I think is pretty good, I think is a positive step, send us that feedback, please, because often people go, well, yeah, I'm okay with that. There's no need for me to reply. I'm guilty of it. But please do send in your feedback, and even if it's just a big thumbs up, yeah, this is great, let us know. Let us have other constructive feedback. So if there's something that you've got evidence that isn't correct or needs some modification, do let us have that, and give us your thoughts. Anecdotal evidence is good as well, particularly in community engagement. So this runs until the 25th of September. So using the website, you can record your feedback. If you go onto jewelleryquarter.net /neighbourhood plan, we then take that away as a group and review the feedback. We go through it, we make amendments to the plan where it's appropriate, and then it goes to the council for the Regulation 16 consultation, which is the plan is locked down, sent to Birmingham City Council, and published formally as in the normal kind of planning process that you might expect. After that, it goes off to an independent examination, which is done by a planning inspector, and that's really just a very basic check on that we've satisfied a few, I think it's 4 key criteria, and then we round off with a referendum, which will be next year. But if we've passed the Regulation 16 consultation and got the endorsement from the independent examiner, this starts to be regarded as a material consideration in planning law. The referendum will be probably with the mayoral elections next year, but we have 2 referenda, one for residents and one for businesses, and we just need a simple majority in both to get that. But as Nicola, my co-chair, said before, engagement is, we could just get a few bits of positive feedback and we could get a few dozen people turn out for the referendum, but that's not what we're about, and that's not what the Jewellery Quarter is about. The Jewellery Quarter, as a bunch of 50-odd people, got together to write this because it's something that we feel passionate about. And also the Jewellery Quarter isn't that kind of place that it will just sit back and let these things pass. People are really good at engaging in the Jewellery Quarter, and thank you for attending.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Matthew. So just one final question there from David there, I've noticed, just before we do this. Are neglected buildings formally identified or their owners named and shamed to stop uncooperative owners from changing the legal owner to get round the sticks or to attract the carrots? Excellent question, David. Very, very good indeed. The truth is I can't give a definitive answer there. What I do know from my experience in the heritage sector is that enforcement is generally pretty adept at avoiding those issues. Neglect is neglect, it is evidence of neglect, and there is that scope within there to say, no, hang on, it's not just the name on the door that's in terms of incentivizing these policies. It is actually about the management of that building over the last 5 to 10 years and how that's come forward. There could be an interesting question arising there, David. So I think that's a very good question. All I'll say is we'll take advice from that, from our planning consultant. We'll ask the question, and if we need to close a loophole we might have accidentally created, we will do so before we move forward. But what I would say is please do put that in the website. You know, go to the website and put it into that consultation box. I appreciate you said please, you know, you gave us your support there in your chat, which is very much appreciated. But if you do just go and stick that question in, that's very useful. It means we have a record of it and we can go and have that conversation. We're coming up to 6 o'clock. We've got one final question there, which has just come up. Am I correct in thinking the BT tower is not protected? And if not, how can we make sure it is? Now that, Neil, is a brilliant question. The BT tower would potentially be a non-designated heritage asset. It would also potentially be a positive contributor to the Jewellery Quarter conservation area. That would be one that would be open for debate and would be one that would be considered in any application that would come forward. The truth is that technically the tower, based on the prevailing characteristics of the quarter, should be deemed harmful. But I have a picture of it on my wall, and I'm a heritage consultant who loves the Jewellery Quarter, so something has gone a little bit awry here in terms of what's happened. It is our principal landmark. It is an absolutely iconic building within the quarter, and I think that landmark status and that kind of iconography within the quarter and the collective value probably does more than enough to make it a positive contributor. What comes forward within the new conservation area appraisal might clarify that and say accordingly. I'd keep an eye on that and see what it says. I'm not sure what it says in that regard. But certainly if it is deemed a positive contributor, it has a certain degree of protection under heritage and neighbourhood plan policy against demolition. Now, what we might want to do with the BT tower, of course, is a big question, an important one, because technically it could become a derelict heritage asset, and you know, we might find ourselves in a slight issue. As Matthew will know, my view is you get Kong back from the bull ring and stick him on top, and we'll have a good bit of public art instead.
The thing I'd add to that is there's an opportunity with the neighbourhood plan in a kind of a roundup section at the end of it, so not necessarily in the policy bit, but to get a list going as to what we as a community would like to apply to be listed. So I personally would get the BT tower as number one on that list, because the Birmingham skyline is unrecognisable if it didn't exist. And yeah, I think the BT tower and a few other buildings could be really good candidates for listing. There's an old Jewish diamond merchants building on Victoria Street, which was a rarity in itself, which could be a candidate as well. Unfortunately, I'd love to talk about this all night, but we have a 5 till 6 slot and we've gone a few minutes over. So recording of this will be available. Tomorrow there's a session on the jewellery and creative industries, and it just leaves me and Jack to thank you very much for attending. Spread the word, direct people to the website, the plain English and the full-length version, the unabridged director's cut is available on there should you wish to read it, and please do give us your feedback.
Excellent. Thank you all for attending, and
thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers.